Chapter 81. There are a few ways a succubus can use her powers, I said quickly, the words tumbling out as Luna fed me the information in real time. First, she makes people feel lust toward her like she just did. Second, she drags out unwanted sexual desires and throws them in your face. For the first one, you two are fine, I added, glancing at Rachel and Cecilia. For the second, you'll need to neutralize it. The best way to do that is to make it not secret or unwanted. Yell it out. Make it something you don't care about. Rachel's face turned a shade of red I'd never seen before, and Cecilia's eyebrow twitched with something halfway between amusement and horror. But I didn't give them time to respond. I propelled myself forward, the silver aura around my sword flaring, as I bent the ambient mana to further enhance my attack. Whatever they were about to yell, or more likely not yell, was now their problem. Vespera's eyes sparkled with delight as I closed the gap, her movements languid and unhurried, like someone watching an overexcited puppy charging at their ankles. So eager, she purred, her tone dripping with condescension. I swung my sword down, the first strike of the Tempest Dance technique, its silver aura humming with a complex blend of elements. Each strike would build momentum, compounding power into the next, until even I struggled to contain it. But this was just the beginning. Wow, Vespera said as she casually raised her hand, swiping at the blade with her fingers. The sound of her nails clashing with my sword rang out like a metallic chime, and my attack was deflected with alarming ease. Your strength is impressive. For a human, anyway. Of course, she barely felt it. I gritted my teeth, already adjusting my stance for the next strike. The Tempest Dance technique wasn't about overwhelming power in a single blow. It was about rhythm, momentum, and persistence. Each strike would grow stronger, faster, more relentless, until even someone like Vespera would have to take me seriously. She's toying with you, Luna said in my mind, as if I hadn't noticed. I know, I thought grimly, stepping back into position. Vespera's aura of miasma swirled around her like an oppressive storm cloud, making the air heavy and thick. Her output and mana capacity as a demon baron, white ranker by human standards, dwarfed my own. A high silver ranker like me couldn't hope to match her raw strength, not without spells. With spellcasting, I could briefly reach the same level of output, but aura was another matter entirely. Aura was limited by conversion, it required active manipulation of mana, and even with the ambient mana I was pulling in, it simply wasn't enough. Still, the Tempest Dance technique wasn't about matching her outright. It was about bridging the gap, however small, and forcing her to work harder than she wanted to. Interesting, Vespera said, tilting her head as I moved in for the next strike. You're not just flailing around like most humans do. That's new. I didn't respond. Words wouldn't help me here. I swung again, faster this time, my sword carving through the air with a whistle. Vespera stepped to the side, her movements smooth as silk, and batted the blade away with her hand, the silver aura flickering slightly on impact. Better, she said, her smile widening. But still not enough. The second strike fed into the third, my movements gaining momentum as the Tempest Dance technique built up. My aura thickened, the mana growing denser with each swing, the energy amplifying in ways that couldn't be undone. I didn't stop, didn't give her time to counter, each strike flowing seamlessly into the next. Vespera's expression shifted slightly, the casual amusement giving way to something sharper. She still deflected my attacks, but now she was using both hands, her movements more deliberate. Not bad, Vespera purred, her voice a mix of amusement and something darker, as her hand met my sword again with a ringing clash. This time, though, she didn't just deflect it. She knocked me back entirely. Before I could react, her leg shot out in a blur, a perfectly executed kick slamming into my chest. The world tilted violently as I was sent flying, the air forced out of my lungs in one terrible rush. Rachel and Cecilia's combined mana caught me mid-air, cushioning the impact before I could crash into the trees. It didn't stop the pain, though. Breathe, breathe, breathe. I coughed hard, the taste of blood sharp and metallic in my mouth. My lungs felt like they were trying to escape my chest, and for a moment, I thought they might succeed. I pushed myself up, shaking, my body screaming at me to just lie down and give up. But there wasn't time for that. Not with Vespera standing there, still smiling like this was all some delightful game. We'll help, Rachel said firmly, her golden mana already flowing into me, knitting together whatever internal damage I'd managed to accrue this time. I could feel the warmth of it restoring my strength, steadying my breaths. Our spells are useless against her magic, but we can boost you. Cecilia sighed, though she didn't argue. She placed a hand on my back, crimson mana joining Rachel's golden flow. Suddenly, I felt it. My strength increasing, my aura surging with a borrowed power that wasn't mine alone. For a brief moment, I felt unstoppable. And then it stopped. My head snapped up as the flow of mana abruptly cut off. Vespera stood spinning delicately on one foot, one finger raised in a mockingly casual swirl. Her eyes gleamed with triumph as her influence spread like an invisible net, catching Rachel and Cecilia. Okay, fine, I admit it, Cecilia blurted out suddenly, her voice ringing through the clearing. I think about Arthur sometimes. Sue me, I'm a girl. I want to pin him down, forget about everything, and make him only think about me as I foo. Cecilia, I shouted, nearly dropping my sword out of sheer shock. My head whipped around to look at her, but the damage was already done. Her cheeks had turned an impressive shade of crimson, almost matching her mana, but she still managed to meet my gaze with the defiant dignity of someone who had just confessed to thinking deeply inappropriate thoughts and dared anyone to challenge her. She really leaned into that one. I thought, completely at a loss for words. Cecilia's embarrassment didn't last long. She turned to Rachel, her crimson eyes narrowing with malicious intent. Ray, your turn. Say it. No. Rachel's voice cracked as her golden wings flared in panic. I'd rather die. Her entire face was red now, the kind of blush that probably violated some natural laws. She refused to look at me, staring resolutely at the ground as though she could will it to swallow her whole. Cecilia let out an exasperated grumble, her mana flaring as she waved me off. Go fight her, Arthur. I'll deal with Rachel. Deal with? I started to protest, but Cecilia silenced me with a sharp glare and a flick of her hand. Crimson mana wrapped around my ears, cutting off whatever further confessions Vespera might have dragged out of them. Just go, Cecilia said, shoving me forward. I've got this. I nodded, forcing myself to focus as I took off, the borrowed power from Cecilia's mana still pulsing faintly within me. Whatever insanity had just happened would have to wait. Right now it was just me and Vespera, and I wasn't about to let her turn this into another round of emotional destruction. The succubus clapped her hands together as I approached, her smile widening. Oh, you're back. Did you enjoy the show? I didn't answer. There wasn't anything to say. My silver aura flared as I charged forward, sword raised, ready to press the attack. Whatever Vespera had planned next, I wasn't going to make it easy for her. Chapter 82. Look, Ray, I'm sorry about what happened. Cecilia began, her tone breezy as if apologizing for a minor inconvenience. I'm sorry that when I video called you, I rigged your phone to automatically pick up. I'm sorry I caught you in your sleepwear on your bed, hugging that pillow like it was a life raft, and blushing while muttering Arthur over and over. And, I'm sorry, I recorded it. You recorded it? Rachel shrieked, throwing her hands up and covering her face in pure, unadulterated shame. Yeah, so what? Cecilia replied with a shrug that seemed to dismiss the scandal entirely. You're a teenage girl, Ray. You can feel what you want, do what you want. It's your life. So tell me, what do you really think of Arthur Nightingale? Rachel peeked through her fingers, her voice trembling. Arthur is cool, she stammered. I mean, he's super smart, talented, hardworking, and strong. But he's also kind. I can see it in his eyes. There's something about him. He's kind, you know? Cecilia's eyes twinkled as she allowed a small, conspiratorial smile. I know, right? It's odd how someone like him, a real crazy bastard who treats everyone like chess pieces, can also be so genuinely kind. It's a paradox that just pulls you in. Yeah, he's not like Lucifer at all. And that's what makes him so much better, Rachel added, her voice gaining strength even as her cheeks stayed stubbornly red. Okay, we get it. You love him, Cecilia said, her voice light but insistent, like someone coaxing a cat out from under a sofa. Now, tell me what you want him to do to you. Rachel's head snapped up, her face turning an impressive shade of red. What? She stammered, looking somewhere between horrified and utterly mortified. Ray, Cecilia said, her tone sharp now. That bitch of a succubus has locked down your powers because of your unresolved sexual fantasy. So you need to say it. What is it? Rachel, who seemed to be attempting to implode from sheer embarrassment, refused to respond. choosing instead to glare at Cecilia as though she'd sprouted an extra head. "Come on, he's hot, isn't he?" Cecilia began, the corners of her lips twitching with a grin. "Lean, muscular, handsome. You probably hugged him before just to see if he felt." "No, no, stop," Rachel screamed, her hands flying up as if that would somehow physically halt the words pouring out of Cecilia's mouth. "No, Rere, we can't stop." Cecilia snapped back, her crimson eyes blazing with an odd mix of determination and exasperation. "If we do, Arthur will die. Do you want that on your conscience? Because I sure don't." Rachel gulped, her sapphire eyes darting toward the ground as if it could offer some kind of escape. She clenched her fists, her breathing unsteady. Then, after a moment that stretched far too long, she exhaled shakily, squaring her shoulders like someone preparing to walk into a battlefield. "Yes, he's hot," Rachel admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want him to hug me tightly and pat my head, because he sees me as I am." Cecilia grinned, clapping her hands together as if Rachel had just solved a particularly tricky math problem. "Good girl. Now admit it. What do you really want from Arthur?" Rachel's blush deepened, her lips trembling as she glanced anywhere but at Cecilia. Her voice came out in a strained squeak. "I want him to gift. Say it plainly," Cecilia said, throwing her hands up in exasperation. "No weird poetic language or dodging around it. Just say it." Rachel squeezed her eyes shut, her voice a high-pitched rush of words. "I want to feel special and to love him and die went." She paused, inhaled sharply, and then practically yelled, "I want him to fuck me. Okay?" Cecilia glanced at Rachel, whose face had been frozen in an impressive display of indignation and embarrassment. "Now, give him your power," Cecilia said, gesturing toward Arthur. Rachel, still red as a tomato, pressed her hands together, golden mana swirling between her palms. The golden energy coalesced into a wing, one of Rachel's own, glowing with a radiance that seemed almost alive. Slowly, she extended it toward Arthur. As soon as the energy made contact with him, it surged into his body, wrapping him in a luminous aura of golden light. Arthur stumbled slightly, his hand gripping his sword as he absorbed the overwhelming energy. For a moment he froze, standing still as his aura shifted. Rachel's golden mana melded with Cecilia's crimson energy, the two forces weaving into Arthur's own silver aura. Shouldn't have worked. Golden mana represented divine order, while crimson mana was chaos incarnate. They were opposites, incompatible by nature. And yet, lucent harmony made it possible, harmonizing the two opposing forces into something entirely new. Cecilia's crimson eyes widened slightly as she watched the process unfold. "That shouldn't work," she muttered. "I didn't even think I could transfer my power like that. His lucent harmony, it's harmonizing chaos and order." Her lips twitched into a grin, though her tone still carried disbelief. "That's insane." Rachel, still mortified, muttered under her breath, "It's Arthur. He's always insane." Wait, wait," Rachel suddenly blurted, her eyes narrowing suspiciously as she spotted something glinting in Cecilia's hands. "Where did you get that phone?" Cecilia, who had been quietly fiddling with the device, glanced up with an expression of pure, unrepentant mischief. "Hee," she giggled, holding it up just long enough for Rachel to see the screen. "I got the confession of a saintess." There was a moment of silence, a moment where Rachel's mouth opened and closed, her blush deepening to a shade that could rival a sunset, and the air seemed to hum with the promise of imminent murder. Before Rachel could erupt, a deafening clash echoed through the clearing. Both girls snapped their attention back to the battle as Vespera and Arthur collided once more. Arthur, enveloped in a swirling aura of silver, gold, and crimson, faced Vespera once more. The succubus, her miasma now unsettled and twitching with irritation, narrowed her eyes at him. "You're full of surprises, aren't you?" she purred, though her tone lacked the earlier, mocking playfulness. Her claws flexed, eager for another attack. "But surprises don't make up for power you don't have." Arthur said nothing. Instead, his breathing steadied as his silver aura flared anew, seamlessly merging with the golden radiance lent by Rachel's saintess magic and the chaotic crimson energy Cecilia's witchcraft had provided. The result was a rare, harmonious force, a living testament to his lucent harmony, where order and chaos danced together in unison. He tightened his grip on his sword and advanced. The clash that followed was not merely a physical contest but a dazzling display of spellcraft. Vespera unleashed waves of miasma that sliced through the air like serrated blades. In response, Arthur's strikes, fueled by the combined might of 3 potent mana streams, saw his sword flash in rapid, precise arcs. Each swing of his blade carried not only the momentum of his Tempest Dance technique, but also the refined control of Rachel's disciplined light magic and the wild, unpredictable force of Cecilia's chaotic spells. For a moment, Vespera's defenses held. Her claws sliced through the incoming energy, deflecting his attacks with deadly accuracy. But as the battle wore on, it became evident that her miasma was thinning. Overwhelmed by the relentless onslaught and the perfect storm of elemental power Arthur now commanded. "Not bad," Vespera hissed as she parried another blow. Though her footing wavered, Arthur pressed his advantage. With each successive strike, the ground trembled beneath the force of his assault. The very air around them seemed to crackle as his combined aura overwhelmed her defenses, slicing through her miasma like a blade of pure light. At last, seizing a moment when Vespera's counterattack faltered, Arthur stepped back, drawing deeply on the full reservoir of his newfound power. His eyes narrowed in focus as he summoned his signature technique, a God Flash, a 5-circle spell that merged every lesson he'd learned from both Cecilia's wild witchcraft and Rachel's honed Saintess magic. In that heartbeat, the clearing was bathed in a blinding conflagration of light. Arthur's sword, now an extension of his will, became a spear of pure radiance. The burst was sudden and overwhelming, an explosion of energy that shattered the dark miasma around Vespera. She staggered, her claws failing to meet the furious onslaught. With one final, decisive strike, Arthur's God Flash struck true, forcing her back with such force that she skidded across the cracked earth. For a long, suspended moment, silence reigned, broken only by the labored breath of the vanquished demon. Then, as if conceding defeat with a hint of admiration, Vespera laughed. A low, genuine sound that lacked malice. Her violet eyes, once fierce and predatory, softened as she regarded Arthur. "You're impressive," she murmured, brushing a lock of hair from her face as she struggled to rise. "Handsome, too. No wonder 2 princesses would fight over you, it makes sense." Before either Rachel or Cecilia could speak, Vespera's miasma gathered once more, swirling around her like a final curtain call, and she vanished into the shadows. The clearing fell quiet. Arthur's aura dimmed gradually, the silver, golden, and crimson energies receding as he lowered his sword. He turned slowly to face Rachel and Cecilia, both of whom watched him with a mixture of awe and relief. Rachel's cheeks remained flushed as she managed a soft, "Good job," while Cecilia's eyes sparkled with both mischief and genuine respect. Arthur nodded wearily, knowing that this battle was over. Chapter 83, Eccentric Headmaster. After the arrival of demons, the midterms were, unsurprisingly, thrown out the window. Instead, our rankings would now be cobbled together from the first 3 practical evaluations, with a hefty dose of subjective judgment from the class professors. Hardly a scientific method, but when demons crash the party, perfection tends to take a back seat. As one might expect, Mythos Academy was in complete and utter turmoil. The attack wasn't just some random hiccup. It was a full-blown catastrophe. This wasn't a spat with rogue beasts or even the odd overzealous mage. It was an incursion by a species long believed extinct. Demons. The very word sent ripples of fear through every corner of the world. While I was one of the lucky, or cursed, few who faced a demon head-on, alongside Rachel and Cecilia no less, the rest of the academy wasn't exactly having a tea party. Professors and security forces found themselves embroiled in battles against cultists of the Order of Fallen Flame, a group of fanatics who had decided now was an excellent time to re-emerge and declare their undying love for the creatures of chaos. The result? Absolute chaos, naturally. The academy had become the center of attention for every major global power. World leaders and media outlets alike scrutinized its every move, wringing their hands over student safety and wondering aloud how an institution hailed as the strongest bastion of education could fail so spectacularly to predict such an attack. The silver lining, if one could call it that, was that no one had died this time. But that did little to calm the storm swirling around us. In the aftermath, we were given a few days to recover before heading home for winter vacation. A brief reprieve, though my thoughts were far from restful. "I still can't believe Cecilia said that," I mused, my cheeks heating slightly at the memory. Sure, Vespera's influence had a hand in loosening her tongue, But Cecilia was already dangerous enough without unfiltered honesty in the mix. And, of course, she wasn't just dangerous. She was also, well, stunningly beautiful. A very, very hot girl. Her words still lingered in my mind, much to my dismay. I wouldn't be straight if I didn't feel it, I thought, shaking my head in frustration. My brooding was interrupted by a sound. A soft but distinct noise that pulled me from my thoughts. I turned my head sharply toward the door, only to see a woman stepping into my room as though she owned the place. Which, technically speaking, she kind of did. Arthur. Luna's voice echoed in my mind, sharp and urgent. Her power. It's way too much. The woman had navy blue hair that shimmered faintly under the artificial lighting and eyes of striking violet that seemed to pierce through the very air. I didn't need Luna's warning to know who she was. She smiled, an expression so casual and confident it was borderline unsettling. "Hi," she said, waving a hand as if she were a neighbor stopping by to borrow sugar. "I just wanted to check in. Heard you killed a demon here at the academy while I was away. Very impressive." I stood quickly, bowing deeply out of respect. "I greet the headmaster of Mythos Academy," I said, keeping my tone even despite the storm of nerves bubbling beneath the surface. "Eva Lopez, rank 11. One of the 11 Radiant rankers in the world. And, as if that wasn't intimidating enough, also the mother of Clara Lopez. A Radiant ranker strolling into your dorm room would have been intimidating under any circumstances. But this wasn't just any Radiant ranker. Eva Lopez was a living anomaly, a figure both revered and feared in equal measure. And she was standing in front of me, smiling like she hadn't just thrown the weight of her overwhelming presence into the room. I straightened, forcing myself to meet her gaze. "It's an honor," I added, hoping to at least mask my unease. Behind her pleasant expression, there was a palpable sense of power, vast, unfathomable, and utterly unshakable. She tilted her head slightly, her smile widening. "You're interesting," she said, as if she were examining a curious artifact. "No wonder Clara mentioned you." And with that, the air in the room grew even heavier. "Thank you," I said, tilting my head in confusion, unsure whether her question required an actual answer or if this was one of those rhetorical traps powerful people like to spring. Eva didn't seem to notice, or care about, my awkwardness. Instead, she simply smiled and made herself comfortable, sitting down with the casual grace of someone who had never in their life needed permission to take a seat. "Well," she said, her tone light and conversational, "I suppose I should reward you for helping save my academy and taking down a demon baron. So, what do you want?" My heart skipped a beat. This was it. The kind of opportunity people wrote songs about, or at least long-winded forum posts. A Radiant ranker offering a reward wasn't something that happened every day. Hell, it probably didn't happen every century. And Eva Lopez wasn't just any Radiant ranker. She wasn't a ruler like some of the others, but she was still one of the richest people on the planet. Trillionaire rich. The kind of rich where reward could mean anything from an artifact of unimaginable power to a private island with its own orbital defense system. So what did I want? What could I ask for that would actually make me stronger? Resources like that didn't just fall out of the sky, and there were no instant solutions in this world. The best items were artifacts, so "I want an ancient-grade sword," I said, my voice steady despite the thudding in my chest. Eva tilted her head slightly, her violet eyes gleaming as if she were evaluating the request. "An ancient-grade sword," she repeated, humming thoughtfully. Then she nodded. "Good choice. That's a solid reward. I'll have it delivered to your house over winter break." I blinked, momentarily stunned at how easily she agreed. Ancient-grade artifacts weren't just expensive, they were astronomical in value, well beyond the reach of my family's budget. Yet Eva had waved it off like it was pocket change. Which, for her, it probably was. There were no shortcuts to power, not really. Spell manuals wouldn't help. I already had a grade 5 art I was training in. Resources that could give me an instant boost simply didn't exist, not at the level I needed. Artifacts were the best option by far, and an ancient-grade artifact was leagues above anything I could have dreamed of owning. I had half expected her to laugh and tell me to dream smaller, but instead, she had just nodded and agreed. Eva stood up, brushing non-existent dust from her coat. "You know," she said, throwing me a sly smile as she walked toward the door. "If you'd asked, I might have even given you my daughter's hand in marriage." She winked at me, her laughter echoing as she left the room. For a moment, I just stood there, processing her words. Why the hell would I want to marry Clara? I muttered under my breath, shaking my head at the absurdity of it. Clara Lopez was eccentric, to put it mildly. Brilliant, yes, but also the kind of person who could probably turn a simple lunch into an experiment with catastrophic consequences. Still, I couldn't complain. I was getting an ancient grade sword out of the deal, and if that wasn't a victory, I didn't know what was. As far as rewards went, this one was practically legendary. Chapter 84, Warped Destiny. Rachel hadn't left her room since the midterms ended. Not because she was worried about her performance, she wasn't. Rachel Creighton, saintess of the Creighton family, didn't worry about exams. Nor was it lingering fear of the demon they'd faced, though anyone else might have spent the next year flinching at shadows. No, her battle against Vespera wasn't the issue. The issue was what happened after. Her mind replayed the scene for what must have been the 100th time, each detail as vivid as if it were etched into her skull. She could still see herself standing there, the words tumbling out of her mouth, her fantasies, of all things, dragged into the light and spoken aloud. And, of course, Cecilia Slatemark, ever the opportunist, had recorded the whole thing. Rachel buried her face into her pillow, her cheeks so red she was sure they'd combust. She hugged the pillow tighter against her chest, as though it might shield her from the memory. Arthur doesn't know, so it's fine? She muttered, though the words felt more like an incantation against her rising panic than any genuine reassurance. But even as she told herself that, her mind refused to stop spinning. The confession hadn't just been embarrassing. It had forced her to confront feelings she hadn't fully understood until now. Feelings she wasn't even sure she wanted to understand. Arthur. He was... How could she even begin to describe him? Smart, talented, hardworking, of course. But it was more than that. There was something about him that drew her in. Something she couldn't ignore. Something kind and real. She hadn't expected to fall for someone like him. But she had. And now, there was no pretending otherwise. The moment that stood out most wasn't even during the battle. It was on the Isle of Azure Breeze. He had shown her something she didn't think anyone could. Something that broke through the carefully constructed walls around her heart. Arthur cared. For her. Not as a saintess or a Creighton or some lofty ideal, but her. And yet, Rachel groaned into her pillow. "It's so embarrassing," she cried, her voice muffled and pitiful. The memory of that stupid confession wasn't just stuck in her head. It had wrapped itself around her. An endless loop of humiliation. How could she face him now? How could she face anyone? And worst of all, Cecilia had the recording. Somewhere, the Slatemark princess was no doubt laughing her head off, replaying the clip like it was her favorite new drama. Rachel rolled over, burying her head under her pillow this time. Maybe if she stayed here long enough, she could avoid the outside world altogether. It wasn't a long-term solution, but it felt like the best option for now. Of course, hiding in her room forever wasn't an option, much as Rachel would have liked to try. Soon enough, it was time to return to the Creighton estate. With a sigh of resignation, she finished packing her bags, stuffing them into her spatial ring with the precision of someone whose brain was elsewhere entirely. She straightened her uniform, took a deep breath, and stepped out of her room. And naturally, the first person she saw was Cecilia Slatemark. "Hey, Ray," Cecilia said brightly, her smile wide enough to power a small city. Rachel froze mid-step, her face already starting to heat. "How?" she stammered. "It's easy to predict someone like you, Ray," Cecilia replied with a smirk that could have been patented as a weapon. "Anyway, were you really planning to sneak off home without saying goodbye to Arthur?" Rachel turned an impressive shade of red as Cecilia continued, undeterred. "You know, Arthur, the boy you want to—" "Shut up," Rachel screamed, bolting past her as fast as her legs would carry her. Cecilia didn't miss a beat. She caught up effortlessly, settling into the Hyperloop seat beside Rachel with the casual confidence of someone who knew they'd won this round. "Hey, Ray," she said, leaning back as though they were discussing the weather. "Here's some honest advice. If you want Arthur, you're going to have to get past this embarrassment." Rachel clenched her fists, her voice dropping to a mutter. "I'm the saintess." "And," Cecilia retorted, tilting her head, "you're not planning to follow that crazy Lucifer's ideals, are you?" Rachel glanced at her, startled by the venom in her voice. "I hate that guy," Cecilia said bluntly, her crimson eyes flashing. "Forcing his ideals on us just because some prophecy claims he's the second hero. Like that's reason enough to turn the rest of us into his tools. I won't follow him. Not ever." Rachel's expression darkened. Cecilia, this is serious. The air around them shimmered faintly as their manna wove a barrier of silence, cutting off the world outside. This wasn't a conversation for public ears. The prophecy. It was a secret shared only with the 7 superpowers of the world, handed down by the seer from Liam Kagu's era. It foretold a threat even greater than the first calamity, the heavenly demon, a calamity that would require the rise of another hero. According to the prophecy, a person with the same talents as Liam Kagu would be born, but that person wouldn't become the hero. And then came Kagu, born into their generation, bearing the exact same talents as the legendary Liam Kagu. But when Lucifer Windward emerged, brilliant, powerful, seemingly unstoppable, the world quietly decided he was the second hero who would save them all. "We need to serve the hero," Rachel said, her voice steady but distant. "Even though our parents are radiant rankers, they won't be enough. The hero will need us." "And what if Lucifer isn't the hero?" Cecilia shot back, leaning forward. "Honestly, that Arthur is more of a hero than Lucifer will ever be. He can even take our powers, albeit inefficiently. Do you really think Lucifer, with all his arrogance, could do the same?" "Lucifer is strong," Rachel said softly, as though trying to convince herself as much as Cecilia. "Arthur will surpass him," Cecilia said with absolute certainty. "I believe in that." "Do you?" Rachel hesitated, the words catching in her throat. In just 3.5 months, Arthur's strength had grown at an incredible rate. His determination, his adaptability, it was like watching someone outrun the horizon. And yet, it was still Lucifer, the second hero, the one the world had already decided on. "I want him to surpass Lucifer," Rachel admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "But I don't know if I can hope for it." "Hope for it?" Cecilia said firmly, her gaze unwavering. "Don't just be the saintess who lights the way for someone like Lucifer Windward, who treats all of us like tools to be used and discarded. You're more than that. You deserve more than that." Rachel's eyes narrowed slightly, her tone sharpening. "Why are you telling me this?" Cecilia shrugged, leaning back with an air of practiced nonchalance. "I can't say I like you, Ray," she said, though her smirk had softened into something less pointed. "But even then, I don't want to see you lose your light because of Lucifer. He's not worth it." For a moment, Rachel didn't respond, her thoughts churning too quickly to form words. But as the Hyperloop sped toward the warp gate, her gaze drifted out the window, the faintest flicker of something resembling hope glinting in her sapphire eyes. Chapter 85 Homecoming. The Slatemark Empire spanned the entirety of the central continent, the largest and arguably the most influential of the 5 continents. Home to nearly 3 billion of the world's 10 billion people, it was a beacon of prosperity. Unlike the other continents, which grappled constantly with miasmic species and cults, the central continent had been spared such chaos. As a result, the empire flourished, offering its citizens a quality of life unmatched anywhere else. At the heart of this empire was Avalon City, the capital. A sprawling metropolis housing 30 million people, it accounted for 1% of the empire's entire population. Covering 50,000 square kilometers, Avalon wasn't just a city. It was a world unto itself. My only other point of reference for a city like this was Luminark, one of the northern continent's twin capitals. Luminark was grand, yes, but Avalon? Avalon was on a completely different level. Its scale, its technological marvels, its effortless blend of futuristic design and serene living. It was in a league of its own. And it was here that my family lived. Well, Arthur's family, technically. Arthur's father was a knight captain as well as a guild master, a mid-integration rank swordsman and a 6-star adventurer. He headed a reputable guild that brought in enough money to comfortably cover the exorbitant fees of Mythos Academy. In other words, they were rich, very rich. I booked a self-driving car to take me to our home. The journey through Avalon was a spectacle in itself. Towering skyscrapers loomed above me, their sleek designs glinting in the soft light of the afternoon. Automated drones flitted through the air, delivering packages with perfect precision. The streets below were immaculate, bustling with life yet strangely quiet due to the whisper-quiet electric vehicles zipping along their dedicated lanes. It was peaceful in a way I hadn't expected. Serene, even. The car eventually pulled up to the apartment complex, a highly secure, ultra-modern skyscraper that screamed, "Old money meets cutting-edge tech." This was where my parents and sister lived. A penthouse apartment at the top of one of the towers. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of disbelief. Arthur's family really was well off. No, scratch that. They were downright loaded. The car dropped me off at the tower's lounge, a spacious, marble-floored area staffed by perfectly polite AI concierges. After verifying my identity, I took the elevator up to the 40th floor, the highest, and stepped out into the quiet hallway that led to the apartment. I rang the doorbell. It didn't take long for the door to open, and I was immediately engulfed in a warm, tight embrace. "You're back," came a melodious voice, full of joy and relief. "Mom," I said, recognizing her instantly as I hugged her back. There's something about a mother's embrace warm, comforting, and, if I'm honest, almost magical. No matter how much of a mess your life is, it makes the world seem a little less terrible. "It's been so long, Arthur," she said as we finally pulled apart, her eyes glistening with happiness. She looked like an older, softer version of me. Same black hair, though hers was far more elegant, and the same striking blue eyes. "Whoa, you're back!" my sister exclaimed as she popped out from behind our mother like an overly excitable jack in the box. Aria Nightingale, 14 years old, a year younger than me and far too full of energy for this time of day. She was already mid-orange rank in mana, which, while impressive for her age, still left her just shy of the level required for top-tier academies like Mythos or Slatemark. Not that she seemed to care. Aria looked like a younger, bouncier version of Mom. Same dark hair, same sharp blue eyes, and a face full of youthful mischief that practically screamed, "I'm going to annoy you at every opportunity." "Where's Dad?" I asked, trying to redirect her attention before she said something snarky. "Working late," Mom replied with a small sigh. "Come on, Arthur, get yourself settled." "Oh, and we got your grades." I froze mid-step. Grades? My brain briefly derailed, trying to remember if I'd done anything particularly stupid during the theory exams. "Not ranks," Aria clarified, rolling her eyes with the sort of exasperation that only a younger sibling can truly perfect. "Honestly, it's written all over your face, you battle-obsessed maniac." "Aria," Mom said, turning to her with a mild glare that instantly put her in her place. "Be nice to your brother." Then, looking back at me, she smiled. "Arthur, you did very well on your theory exams. We're proud of you, and we heard you've temporarily been ranked first, though it might change." "It will, Mother," I said quickly, shaking my head. "Rank 1's a bit out of reach." "Even so, you're doing very well," she said, her smile softening into something warmer. "You're in Class A with all those geniuses and royals. That's no small feat now. Come, let's talk." Aria tagged along as the three of us settled into the spacious living room. She looked far too excited, like a kid who knew Christmas was coming early and couldn't wait to start tearing into the presents. "I heard about the Demon Baroness," Mom said after a moment, her voice quieter now. She took my hand, her fingers curling tightly around mine. There was a weight to her words, a mother's worry, unspoken but loud enough to feel. "You defeated her, didn't you?" "I had help," I admitted. "Rachel and Cecilia were with me." "Wait, Princesses Rachel Creighton and Cecilia Slatemark?" Aria gasped, her eyes wide with equal parts admiration and disbelief. "Wow, you're friends with celebrities. That's so cool." "Well, kind of," I said, already regretting how long this conversation was going to last. "Wait, didn't you visit Princess Rachel's estate during fall break?" Mom asked, her head tilting slightly as if trying to recall the details. "While we were traveling for Aria's academy visits?" "I did," I said, bracing myself. Aria's face lit up like someone had just handed her the juiciest gossip in the world. "So what's she like? Is she as beautiful as the pictures?" "Oh, and what about Cecilia? Everyone says she's gorgeous and terrifying." "Aria," Mom interrupted gently, though there was a knowing smile on her face. "Let your brother breathe." "Fine," Aria grumbled, sitting back but still practically vibrating with curiosity. "But we're going to talk about this later." "Rachel is very kind and nice," I said, trying to sound as neutral as possible. "And yes, she's beautiful. But more than that, she really lives up to the image of a saintess. Though sometimes she's terrifying," I added silently, the memory of her and Cecilia bickering in the middle of a battle flashing through my mind. A saintess she might be, but she had her moments. "So, Arthur, do you like any girls?" my mother asked, a smile playing on her lips. It wasn't the teasing kind of smile, it was worse. It was the encouraging kind. The kind that promised this conversation wouldn't end anytime soon. "No," I said quickly, sitting up straighter, trying to project the aura of a man who had no time for such frivolities. "Oh, come on," Arya piped up, practically bouncing in her seat. "You're surrounded by the prettiest girls. You've got to like one of them. Invite some of them over for a party or something. You just want their autographs," I said, narrowing my eyes at her. She responded with a pout so exaggerated it could have won awards. "Anyway," I said, brushing off the topic, "I'm friends with 3 girls, but that's it. Just friends." "Oh, which ones?" my mother asked, her curiosity piqued. Arya, of course, leaned forward, her blue eyes sparkling like a reporter chasing a headline. "Rose Springshaper, Rachel Creighton, and Cecilia Slatemark," I answered, bracing myself for the inevitable follow-up questions. "Oh, Count Springshaper's daughter," my mother said, her expression shifting into one of recognition. "You know Count Springshaper?" I asked, surprised. "He's famous, even for a count," she replied, adjusting the bracelet on her wrist in a way that suggested this was common knowledge. "He's being considered for a promotion to Marquis." "Good for them," I said with a polite smile, though inwardly, I made a mental note to never underestimate my mother's knowledge of noble gossip. Before the conversation could spiral further into the endless labyrinth of nobility and titles, the sound of the front door opening echoed through the apartment. A moment later, my father stepped in, his broad frame filling the doorway. Douglas Nightingale wasn't the kind of man you could ignore, even if you tried. With his neatly trimmed black hair and sharp eyes, he radiated the calm authority of a knight captain who'd seen his fair share of battles and lived to tell the tale. "Arthur," he said, his voice warm but firm, as he walked over to clasp me on the shoulder. "It's good to have you home." "It's good to be back, Dad," I replied, genuinely meaning it. "I heard about the Demon Baroness," he said, his tone shifting to something more serious. "You held your ground well. I'm proud of you." "I had help," I said modestly. "Rachel and Cecilia were there." "Ah," my father said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "The princesses. I'd say you've chosen your friends wisely." "Don't give him ideas, Dad," Arya cut in, throwing her hands up in mock despair. "He's already friends with celebrities. It's so unfair." "You'll have your time, Arya," my father said with a chuckle. "You're doing well for your age. Keep at it." We spent the evening talking about school, the demon attack, my classes, and Arya's upcoming academy applications. My parents' pride was evident in everything they said, and even Arya, with all her teasing, was genuinely curious about my time at Mythos. Later that night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of my old room, a strange warmth settled over me. It wasn't the plush blanket or the familiar surroundings. It was the simple, undeniable comfort of being part of a family. For someone like me who had never had a family in my previous life, this was indescribable. I closed my eyes, letting the feeling sink in. "Thanks, Arthur," I whispered into the quiet darkness. The words meant for the boy whose life I now lived, because for all the trials, the battles, and the chaos, I knew one thing. This feeling, this warmth, was worth it all. Chapter 86. I woke up early the next morning, the faint hum of Avalon stirring outside the window. My family was already up and about, and as I walked into the kitchen, I found my father fastening the strap of his scabbard, preparing to head to the guild. "Arthur, hang out with Arya today, will you?" my mother said cheerfully as she set a cup of tea on the counter. "I've got to go with your father." "So early?" I asked, rubbing the last remnants of sleep from my eyes. "Early bird gets the worm or the guild paperwork," she replied with a tired but fond smile. My mother wasn't a mana user, only a red ranker, but she was deeply involved in the management of Minerva, the bronze-ranked guild my father ran. In the Slatemark Empire, guilds were graded like gemstones: diamond, gold, silver, bronze, and iron. Only 12 guilds in the empire had reached the coveted diamond rank, known collectively as the 12 Great Guilds, and their guildmasters were trillionaires with power that rivaled nobility. Even silver-ranked guildmasters were comfortably lounging in the billionaire club. My father's guild, while not at that level, was still immensely profitable. Retiring as a knight captain, he'd turned his expertise into an enterprise, raking in enough wealth to live in luxury and send me to Mythos Academy without breaking a sweat. The guild wasn't just about slaying beasts. It was about harvesting their value. Bones, skins, mana stars. Everything a beast had to offer could be monetized, and Minerva did its job well. After we saw our parents off, I turned to Arya, who was practically bouncing on her toes. "So, what do you want to do?" I asked. "Someplace fun," she declared with the enthusiasm only a 14-year-old could muster. "Fun costs money," I said, raising an eyebrow. "Pick something that won't leave me broke." "Cheapskate," she muttered, heading off to get ready. I sighed and did the same. When we were both set, me in a leather jacket, her in a denim one, we stepped out to one of the self-driving cars we owned. High-end, luxurious, and the kind of thing that subtly whispered, "Yes, we're rich, but we don't like to shout about it." "How about breakfast first?" I suggested as we climbed into the back seat.
Le poilt. Aria chirped.
I frowned.
Le poilt?
Is that trying to be French? But I put the destination into the car anyway, the world's single global language, ensuring that no one really knew how to pronounce things anymore. The car whisked us out of the gated community and into the vibrant sprawl of Avalon. When we arrived, I stepped out and froze. "This is a coffee shop?" I muttered, staring at the colossal 3-story building in front of me. It looked more like a luxury hotel or a corporate headquarters than a place to grab a caffeine fix. Arya tugged at my sleeve, dragging me inside. The interior was sleek and modern, with polished floors that reflected the soft glow of ambient lighting. The patrons were sparse but distinctly high status, the kind of people whose net worth probably had an entire department of accountants assigned to it. "How expensive is this place?" I asked, already regretting my decision to let her choose. Arya's grin turned mischievous. "Oh, nothing much. A coffee here is just $5,000. I nearly choked. $5,000. I stared at her, my mind racing to calculate how many actual coffee beans it took to justify that price. "What the hell do they put in the coffee?" "Liquid gold." "Please, brother." Arya clasped her hands together, her eyes sparkling with mock innocence. "I'll even call you Big Brother if you buy me one." "No chance," I replied flatly, though the twitch in my eyebrow betrayed my mounting frustration. In the end, I sighed, defeated, and followed her to the counter to request a table. Arya's face lit up with the kind of joy that made me wonder if I'd just been expertly manipulated. We were shown to a private booth because of course even the seating here was high-end, and handed menus that made my wallet flinch. As I stared at the menu, my soul slowly dying with each eye-watering price tag, a server walked in and set down 2 cups of coffee. "Excuse me, we didn't order yet," I said, glancing up. "A lady sent these your way," the employee replied with a polite nod. "Please enjoy." Before I could process that, Arya gasped, her voice practically shaking with excitement. Brother, do you know what this is?" "It's the Gold Swirl coffee. It costs $17,999. My jaw dropped. 17, what, who even? Words failed me entirely as I stared at the glistening, golden-flecked liquid in the cup. What kind of madman sends strangers coffee worth a small fortune? Arya, meanwhile, was already reaching for the cup, her eyes sparkling with glee. "Brother," she said dramatically, "you attract some very interesting people." That much, at least, was painfully true. I took a cautious sip of the infamous Gold Swirl coffee, fully prepared to declare it an overhyped gimmick. But, to my great annoyance, it was incredible. Not just good, no. This coffee tasted like it had been brewed by the hands of divine baristas themselves, each being coaxed into perfection by the whispers of angels. The flavor wasn't merely rich. It was transcendent, like drinking liquid ambrosia that somehow also gave you a mild buzz of energy without any unpleasant jittery side effects. Of course, the reason this coffee could even cost such an absurd amount of money wasn't just the taste. Beverages like this in this world had practical benefits too. This wasn't just coffee. It was essentially a C-grade elixir disguised as a hot drink. Enhanced physical recovery, sharper mental clarity, and an overall feeling that life just wasn't as bad as you thought. All packed into one golden cup of extravagance. But $17,999? It still wasn't worth it. Not even slightly. At least my wallet had been spared the slaughter, thanks to the mysterious benefactor. We stuck to ordering sandwiches, which, though hilariously overpriced at $50, were still delicious. Between the coffee and the food, I had to admit the experience was begrudgingly enjoyable. "You're lucky someone bought us coffee?" I muttered, giving Arya a pointed look as she cheerfully demolished her sandwich. She giggled, entirely unbothered, while I sighed and tried not to think about how much more I could have saved if we'd just stayed home. "Anyway," I said, steering the conversation towards something more productive, Have you thought about which academy you want to go to? Arya leaned back in her seat, brushing a crumb off her denim jacket. Not really, she admitted. But I don't want to stay too close to home, that's for sure. You moved halfway across the world. I should at least get to pick somewhere else in the Empire. That made sense. Mythos Academy was special. It was on its own island, completely independent from the 7 superpowers that ruled the world. But Arya, being a citizen of the Slatemark Empire, didn't have that kind of freedom. Students here didn't have the luxury of international visas. Academies only accepted students who were citizens of their continent. If Arya wanted to study elsewhere, she'd have to go through the arduous process of applying for citizenship, or marry someone from a different continent. Both options were long, complicated, and not exactly practical for a 14-year-old. Well, you'll get into a very good academy no matter what, I said confidently. Arya was no slouch. She might not be Mythos material yet, but she wasn't far off. With a bit of work and luck, she could even qualify for Slatemark Academy, the best in the Empire. She grinned at me, though there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. You think so? I know so, I said firmly. I studied her for a moment, noting her growing strength. She had the potential to reach integration rank in the future, and that alone would open up plenty of opportunities for her. You've got the talent, I added, taking another sip of the ridiculously expensive coffee. The only question is how far you're willing to go to use it. Farther than you, probably, she quipped with a smirk. I shook my head with a wry smile, but inwardly, I was proud. She had a spark, a drive that promised she'd make her own mark on the world. And while I wasn't sure what lay ahead for either of us, I knew one thing. She'd be just fine. Chapter 87. After finishing our overpriced but delicious breakfast, Arya declared that we weren't heading home just yet. We can't waste a perfectly good day in Avalon, she said with a grin that told me I wasn't getting a vote in the matter. And so began the whirlwind sibling tour of the capital. First stop, a sprawling arcade that somehow combined cutting-edge virtual reality games with old-school classics. Arya insisted on challenging me to a few rounds of Battlezone Chronicles, a competitive VR shooter. I'll admit, her skills were better than I expected, and she took great joy in repeatedly sniping me from ridiculous angles. You're too predictable, she taunted, her voice coming through the comms as her avatar did a victory dance over my virtual corpse. You've played this game before. I shot back, ducking behind cover in the real world as though it might save me. Not my fault you're bad, she quipped, capping it off with a well-timed rocket launcher shot that ended our match. After thoroughly humiliating me in the arcade, she dragged me to Avalon's Sky Garden, a massive, multi-level park suspended hundreds of meters above the city streets. It was a marvel of engineering, filled with lush greenery, shimmering fountains, and enough scenic overlooks to make anyone question why they didn't spend more time outdoors. This place is amazing, Arya said, leaning on the railing as we looked out over the city. The sunlight gleamed off the countless glass buildings, casting shimmering reflections that danced across the skyline. It really is, I agreed, taking a moment to appreciate the quiet beauty of it all. We spent the rest of the afternoon wandering through the garden, stopping to grab ice cream from a food cart and taking the occasional sibling selfie. Mostly because Arya insisted we document the day. By the time we returned home around 4 p.m., the sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, painting the city in soft hues of gold and orange. As we stepped into the apartment, the familiar sound of our parents talking greeted us from the living room. Welcome back, Mom called, looking up from her seat on the couch. She had her tablet in one hand and a cup of tea in the other, the very picture of post-work relaxation. How was work? I asked, setting my jacket on the back of a chair. Busy as always, Dad replied, stepping into the room with a glass of water. His usual aura of authority was softened by the small smile on his face. We had a few new contracts come in. Nothing too exciting, but solid work. That's great, I said, sitting down across from him. Arya plopped onto the couch beside Mom, immediately diving into a recap of our day. And then Arthur lost badly, might I add, at Battlezone Chronicles, she said with far too much enthusiasm. Mom laughed softly. Well, I'm glad you two had fun. It's nice to see you spending time together. Yeah, laugh it up, I muttered, though I couldn't help but smile. Despite Arya's relentless teasing, it had been a good day. The doorbell rang suddenly, cutting through the comfortable hum of our family evening. Were you expecting anyone? I asked, getting up from my seat. No, my dad said, his brow furrowing. And no one entered the complex according to security. Maybe it's a friend. I nodded, curiosity prickling at the edges of my mind. As I approached the door, I glanced through the peephole and saw a man I didn't recognize standing there. Cautiously, I opened the door. Surprise, Arthur? A familiar, sing-song voice chirped as someone launched themselves at me. Before I could react, Cecilia Slatemark had her arms wrapped around my neck, hugging me with the enthusiasm of someone who just reunited with a long-lost soulmate. Cecilia, I exclaimed, taken aback as she rubbed her face against mine like an overly affectionate cat. Her crimson eyes sparkled with mischief as she leaned closer, her voice dropping into a playful whisper. Don't forget what I said in front of that succubus. Okay? My face immediately went hot, and I was fairly certain my ears were about to combust. Before I could even form a coherent response, another voice broke through the moment. Cecilia, stop smothering Arthur, Rachel Creighton said, appearing behind her enemy with a disapproving glare. Her sapphire eyes narrowed as she folded her arms, radiating an aura of quiet authority that only Rachel could pull off. Cecilia stepped back, grinning shamelessly. Ah, you can hug him too, you know, she said, her tone teasing. Rachel hesitated, her gaze darting from Cecilia to me. Then, to my utter surprise, she opened her arms and stepped forward, wrapping me in a soft, hesitant hug. Rachel? I managed to say, completely unprepared for this turn of events. Sorry about the unannounced visit, she muttered, her voice barely audible as she let go. Her cheeks were dusted with the faintest hint of pink. And sorry for tricking you with the peephole, Cecilia chimed in, looking far too pleased with herself. All thanks to Rachel's light magic. It was your plan, Rachel retorted, rounding on her with a glare that could have frozen lava. Don't blame me for your nonsense. Meanwhile, I was doing my best to keep up with the sheer chaos unfolding in front of me. Finally, I managed to gather my wits and turned back toward the living room. Mom, Dad? I said, trying to sound as composed as possible. These are the two princesses I mentioned, Rachel Creighton and Cecilia Slatemark. For a moment, there was silence as my parents processed the scene. Then my mother stood up, a warm smile spreading across her face. Well, any friends of Arthur are welcome here, she said, stepping forward. It's an honor to meet you both. Friends? Friends, Cecilia said, placing a hand on her chest as if mortally offended. Arthur and I are much closer than that. Cecilia, Rachel hissed, her blush deepening. Anyway, please don't bother with formalities, Cecilia said, flashing a smile that could disarm even the most stoic of parents. We're just here to see Arthur because, well, we forgot to say goodbye to him. Of course, my mother said warmly, her hands clasped together like she'd been preparing for this exact moment her entire life. Feel free to have fun while you're here. My father gave a polite nod of greeting before my mother whisked him away, undoubtedly to discuss something important, or perhaps just to leave the youths to their own devices. Meanwhile, Arya stood frozen a few feet away, looking like someone who'd just been told their favorite celebrity was standing in the next room. She seems to be a fan of both of you, I said, gesturing toward her. This is my younger sister, Arya. Rachel stepped forward, offering Arya a gentle smile. Hi, nice to meet you. The dam broke. Wow, you're Rachel Creighton. The saintess. Arya gushed, grabbing Rachel's hand with both of hers, as if she'd been waiting for this moment her entire life. Oh my God. I'm such a big fan. You're so pretty. Rachel laughed softly, her cheeks tinged with a faint blush. Thank you, she said, her tone bright and full of warmth. She matched Arya's enthusiasm effortlessly, which, honestly, was a feat in itself. Well, if you love Rachel, you're going to love this video, Cecilia began, her grin as sharp as ever, only to abruptly clamp her mouth shut when a flicker of golden light shimmered ominously in the air. Cecilia? Rachel tilted her head, her smile unwavering but now tinged with the kind of sweetness that could rot teeth. I think you were about to say something very unnecessary, you know, like yourself. It was like watching a perfectly rehearsed comedy routine, except I wasn't entirely sure Cecilia wouldn't actually end up turned into a pillar of light if she pushed things too far. Meanwhile, Arya stood between them, completely oblivious to the subtle power play unfolding, her attention still squarely on Rachel. Oh my gosh, you're Cecilia Slatemark, Arya nearly squealed, turning to Cecilia with stars in her eyes. It's such an honor to meet you. I hope my idiot brother isn't being too much of a burden or, like, annoying to you. I mean, I know he's really stupid, but please tolerate him. Hey, I cut in, frowning. Who are you calling stupid? Nah, she's right, Cecilia said with a giggle, not even bothering to look at me as she ruffled Arya's hair. You are stupid. Excuse me, I said, half offended, though I wasn't sure if it was worth the energy to argue. But it's fine with us, right, Ray Ray? Cecilia added, turning to Rachel, who simply sighed. Stop calling me that, Rachel muttered under her breath before turning back to Arya with a reassuring smile. Don't worry about your brother. He's tolerable. Tolerable? I muttered, crossing my arms. That's the best you've got? Rachel's lips quirked into something suspiciously close to a smirk. Take it as a compliment. Arya, meanwhile, was still staring at both of them with the kind of wide-eyed awe normally reserved for actual miracles. I sighed and leaned back against the doorframe. This was going to be a long day. Chapter 88. I'm sorry for not coming to see you, Rachel said, her voice soft but steady as she stepped closer. I tilted my head in confusion. Don't worry about it. No, I do, she insisted, and her hand lightly gripped my sleeve, halting any further argument. Her sapphire eyes met mine, and for a moment, I wondered if this was how angels apologized earnestly, as if the fate of the universe depended on it. You're a good friend of mine, so I'm sorry for behaving like that, she said. Then her face broke into a bright, radiant smile, the kind that could stop wars or melt glaciers. With her golden hair catching the light just so, she looked almost ethereal. Please think of me as your precious friend, Arthur. I blinked, momentarily thrown off by the sheer sincerity in her voice. I do, I managed to say, though my throat felt oddly tight. You're the first person I can consider precious after her, I muttered under my breath, quickly turning away before I gave too much of myself away. But of course, no moment of peace could last too long in the presence of Cecilia Slatemark. Without warning, she wrapped her arms around my neck in a far too familiar hug, her crimson eyes glinting with amusement as she whispered, Don't tell me you don't find this amusing. Cecilia? I said, holding my arms up awkwardly as Arya's jaw practically hit the floor. What are you playing at? I muttered under my breath, keeping my voice low enough to avoid further scandalizing my poor sister. I told you, Cecilia murmured, her voice dripping with mischief. I want to stun you so badly you'll be on your knees. Tell me, how close am I? I didn't answer, partly because I didn't know how, and partly because acknowledging anything would just make her worse. Cecilia Slatemark had a terrifying talent for reading people, and while I wasn't easily shaken, even I found her unnerving. Well, I also like seeing Ray Ray react like that, Cecilia giggled as she finally let go, winking at me. Now, how about you become a decent host for once? Honestly, Arthur, get it together. Her ability to be both charming and deeply annoying truly bordered on superhuman. I'll get some drinks, I said with a sigh. We can order food later. Come with me, Arya. Leaving Rachel and Cecilia to their own devices, I guided my still wide-eyed sister toward the kitchen. Hey, brother, Arya began as soon as we were out of earshot. Are you dating one of them? What? Of course not, I replied, scandalized by the very idea. That makes sense, she said, nodding thoughtfully. But still. She glanced back toward the living room, her gaze lingering on Rachel. What is it? I asked, frowning. No, it's nothing, she said quickly, shaking her head. I must have seen it wrong. I tilted my head, confused but too tired to press the issue. With a sigh, I turned back to the task at hand, fetching drinks and pretending I wasn't completely out of my depth. Meanwhile, back in the living room, Rachel sat still as a statue, maintaining a serene expression until the kitchen door swung shut. Then, as if a dam had burst, she melted into the cushions, her composure utterly abandoned. He called me precious, she thought, her grin so wide it was almost comical. She felt like she could float straight out of the apartment. But, of course, Cecilia wasn't one to let happiness go unchecked for too long. The serene quiet of the moment was suddenly shattered by a loud, unmistakable voice. "I want him to fuck me." Rachel's recorded confession blared from Cecilia's phone, quiet enough so only Rachel could hear it. Rachel froze. Her head snapped toward Cecilia, whose face was the picture of smug satisfaction. "Hee," Cecilia giggled, twirling a strand of her golden hair as if she hadn't just detonated a social grenade. "Why?" Rachel hissed, her eyes narrowing into sharp, furious slits. "You looked too happy," Cecilia replied with a nonchalant shrug. "I didn't like it." Rachel's glare darkened, her mind working rapidly to read Cecilia's mood. Normally, the teasing princess had an air of playful chaos about her. But this was different. There was no hint of lightheartedness now, just a quiet, simmering dissatisfaction. Rachel leaned back, her lips curving into a knowing smirk. "Looks like even you have things you don't understand, Cecilia." For once, Cecilia didn't have a snappy retort. She just looked at Rachel, her usual confidence briefly faltering. And in that rare moment of silence, Rachel allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. "Look at that. Even you can be cute when you try," Rachel teased, leaning in to poke Cecilia's cheek with the precision of someone deliberately baiting a feral animal. Cecilia recoiled instantly, her expression somewhere between affronted and murderous. "Don't assume I won't show Arthur the recordings I have," she hissed, folding her arms defensively as if the mere mention of her blackmail material could reassert her dominance. "Oh, shut up," Rachel replied breezily, running a hand through her golden hair like a queen brushing off a commoner's complaint. "You're always threatening me with those recordings, but you never actually show them. And honestly, it wouldn't even matter. What's the worst that happens? I get a little embarrassed." Cecilia sighed dramatically, tossing her hair back with enough flair to make it clear she wasn't conceding defeat but rather tolerating Rachel's insolence. "For now. You've developed a thick skin," she muttered. "You made me develop one," Rachel shot back confidently, her smile bright and sharp. "And let me warn you, Cecilia, I won't lose. You told me not to, didn't you? So I won't. Not to you and not to any other girl he charms, which he absolutely will, because he's so damn charming." Cecilia's crimson eyes narrowed, her tone turning colder. "I don't like him," she said flatly. "Carnal desire? Sure. Emotional attachment?
No."
Rachel blinked, her expression unreadable for a moment before a slow, smug smile spread across her face. "Cecilia," she said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "How interesting. Even you have a weakness. What did you say?" Cecilia's voice dropped an octave, her crimson eyes glinting with dangerous intensity. "Oh, nothing." Rachel tilted her head innocently, though the playful lilt in her voice was anything but. "Just think about it, Cecilia. Maybe you'll figure it out while we're here. And I hope you do, because when you do, I'll be waiting to crush you." The air between them turned heavy, crackling with tension. Cecilia's crimson mana surged like a storm about to break, while Rachel's golden mana shimmered steadily, calm yet unyielding. The two forces clashed invisibly, chaotic energy grinding against unwavering order, witchcraft against saintess, chaos against light, destruction against salvation. They were so similar and yet utterly opposed. Both were princesses, both extraordinarily talented, both masters of spellcasting and the subtle art of reading people. Both were beautiful and captivating in ways that drew others to them almost without effort. But while Cecilia thrived on chaos, bending rules and people alike to her will, Rachel existed to restore order, to heal and salvage what was broken. Where Cecilia manipulated, Rachel inspired. Where Cecilia sowed destruction, Rachel rebuilt. The room seemed to hold its breath as the two stood there, facing each other, their personalities clashing as much as their mana. Opposites in every way, bound by circumstance and, perhaps, a begrudging respect neither of them would ever fully admit to. Chapter 89. Arya and I stepped back into the living room, and the first thing that hit me was the palpable tension hanging in the air, thick enough to slice with a dull butter knife. I sighed inwardly. Of course, Cecilia and Rachel argued about something. It was as inevitable as gravity, though significantly less useful. The two of them were like oil and water, except the oil was explosive and the water was radioactive. Cecilia sat perched on the armrest of the couch, her golden hair catching the light like a waterfall of molten gold. She looked utterly at ease, her lips curled into that ever-present smirk of hers. But there was something different, something I couldn't quite place. Her eyes didn't have the same glint of sharp malice they usually carried after one of her verbal sparring sessions. The usual storm of chaos around her was quieter, less destructive. Rachel, on the other hand, stood by the window, her arms crossed and her golden hair glowing faintly in the afternoon sunlight. She wasn't retreating like she might have before. Instead, she looked almost bold. Her sapphire eyes met Cecilia's with an unflinching confidence, a quiet strength radiating from her that wasn't there the last time they'd had one of their little battles. Interesting, I thought, my mind immediately cataloging the changes. Cecilia's usual venom was dulled, and Rachel's usual hesitance had evaporated. Whatever had happened between them had clearly left its mark. "Well, this is cozy," I said, breaking the silence as I set the tray of drinks on the table. "Did you two settle your differences or just agree to disagree on the definition of orderly murder?" Cecilia's smirk widened, and she tilted her head at me. "Oh, Arthur, we're just bonding," she said, her voice dripping with honey and mischief. Rachel snorted softly. An actual snort, not the refined chuckle I was used to hearing from her. "Bonding, sure. If by bonding you mean Cecilia trying and failing to get under my skin." "You love it when I try," Cecilia replied, her tone casual but with the slightest edge. "Not really," Rachel said, her voice steady, her sapphire eyes sharp. She turned to me, her face softening as if she'd just remembered I existed. "Arthur, thank you for the drink." You're welcome?" I said, surprised by how direct she was. Normally, Rachel had this air of reserved politeness, like she was afraid of offending anyone. But now she seemed entirely in control of herself, of the situation, maybe even of Cecilia. Arya, meanwhile, was staring at the two princesses like they were some kind of rare phenomenon, whispering to me, "What happened here? Did Rachel get possessed or something?" "No idea," I whispered back. Maybe Cecilia annoyed her into self-actualization. Arya stifled a giggle, and Cecilia's sharp crimson eyes flicked toward us. "You two are whispering. That's rude, you know. So is recording people without their permission." Rachel shot back without missing a beat. Cecilia froze for the briefest of moments before recovering with a laugh that was just a little too forced. "Oh, come on, Ray. You're still hung up on that? It was funny." "Funny to you," Rachel said, her tone light but firm. Then she turned to me again, her expression softening once more. "Arthur, do you think I'm funny?" It was such a straightforward, unexpected question that I almost choked on my drink. What? Do you think I'm funny?" she repeated, tilting her head slightly. I glanced at Cecilia, who was watching with an expression that was somewhere between intrigued and annoyed. Rachel's boldness seemed to have thrown her off balance too. "Yeah, I guess," I said finally. "I mean, in your own way." Rachel smiled. A genuine, radiant smile that somehow managed to be both endearing and terrifying. "Thank you." Cecilia rolled her eyes, muttering something under her breath that sounded suspiciously like saintly manipulation. The dynamic between them had shifted, and I wasn't sure how to feel about it. Rachel was no longer the quiet, hesitant saintess, and Cecilia was less vicious, somehow. It was like the battle lines between them had blurred, and neither of them was quite sure where they stood anymore. Well, it seemed like Rachel had reverted to her original self, I thought, watching her with a faint smile. She had always been the embodiment of golden retriever energy. Bright, boundlessly kind, and genuinely thrilled to bring a bit of sunshine into everyone's lives. She wasn't just nice. She was the blueprint for nice, the kind of person who made you feel guilty for ever being cynical about the world. Her boundless enthusiasm was most notable around Lucifer, the so-called second hero in the novel. She adored him, but when it came to me, somewhere along the way, around the midterms to be specific, that boundless energy had dimmed. She became quieter, more introspective, almost hesitant. I didn't know what had caused the change, but I had a feeling it had something to do with Cecilia. Cecilia Slatemark, of course, had her own way of complicating things. She was the opposite of Rachel in every conceivable way. Chaotic, sharp, and fiercely manipulative. If Rachel was a golden retriever, Cecilia was a cunning fox, always a step ahead, always ready to pounce. And yet, even Cecilia seemed different now. Rachel and Cecilia had always been like oil and water, locked in an eternal tug-of-war, but now the dynamic between them had shifted. There was less antagonism, less venom. Not that Cecilia wasn't still teasing and sharp as ever. No, she wasn't one to let her claws dull. but there was something almost restrained about her now. Arthur, I have to say, you look like someone's trying to do maths in their head, Cecilia said, breaking me out of my thoughts. She leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand, her crimson eyes glinting with amusement. What's going on in that complicated little brain of yours? Nothing, I said quickly, though the slight smirk tugging at her lips told me she didn't believe a word of it. Liar, Cecilia said, sitting up straighter, her energy shifting, but instead of her usual biting tone, there was something softer, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Fine, keep your secrets, but don't think I haven't noticed. Noticed what? I asked, feeling like I was walking into a trap. Both of you, Cecilia said, gesturing between Rachel and me with an elegant wave of her hand. Something's changed. You're different. She's different. Her voice didn't have its usual edge. It was almost contemplative. Rachel, standing by the window, didn't immediately react. Then, to my utter shock, she turned to Cecilia with a small, knowing smile. And so are you, Cecilia. Cecilia's eyes narrowed, her confidence faltering for just a moment before she recovered. I don't know what you're talking about, she said breezily, though her voice lacked its usual venom. Rachel just laughed, a soft, melodic sound that filled the room. Of course you don't. I glanced between the two of them, utterly baffled. Rachel, back to her golden retriever energy but with a sharpness that wasn't there before, and Cecilia, still the queen of chaos but muted, in a way that didn't feel like her. It was like watching two rivals spar with words, only to realize halfway through the fight that they didn't actually hate each other as much as they thought. And then, Cecilia did something that shocked me more than anything else. She leaned back, crossing her arms and smiled. Not a smirk, not her usual sharp grin, but a genuine, almost vulnerable smile. Rachel was right, God damn it, she muttered under her breath, just loud enough for me to catch. I blinked, utterly thrown. Whatever had happened between them, it had clearly changed them both. And for the first time in a very long while, I wasn't entirely sure what to make of it. Chapter 90. Well, I hope you're all having fun, Alice Nightingale announced cheerfully as she stepped into the living room, her energy as bright as a midday sun. Arthur, Arya, how about you two go buy some food for our guests? Mom, we have delivery, Arya began, only to be cut off by Alice folding her arms in a way that could topple empires. I'm not paying extra, she declared, her tone brooking no argument. Go, go. Arthur and Arya exchanged a long-suffering look before dragging themselves off the couch. Fine, Arthur muttered, trudging toward the door with Arya in tow. As the door clicked shut behind them, Alice's warm smile shifted ever so slightly, and she turned back to Rachel and Cecilia with an expression that was almost calculating. Now then, she said, her voice still pleasant but with a subtle edge. Shall we talk? Rachel tilted her head, her golden hair glinting in the light. Yes. Sorry, Alice said, scratching her cheek as a hint of nervousness crept into her posture. You both said no honorifics, didn't you? I didn't mean to. No, it's all right, Rachel reassured her, raising her hands quickly. Please, Miss Nightingale. Alice smiled, her confidence returning. Thank you, Rachel. She settled into her seat with practiced grace. I just wanted to ask about my son. How is he? Rachel immediately brightened, as if someone had flipped a switch. Arthur is a wonderful friend, she began, her words spilling out in an enthusiastic rush. He's strong, talented, hardworking, super intelligent, and, oh, he's so caring too. Alice listened with a soft smile, her eyes twinkling as Rachel continued her glowing review. Finally, Rachel caught herself mid-ramble, her hands flying to her mouth as her cheeks turned pink. I mean he's great. I'm glad you like him, Rachel, Alice said warmly. Being close to the Saintess is a very good thing, after all. Then her gaze shifted to the other girl. And what about you, Cecilia? Cecilia, who had been suspiciously quiet until now, shrugged without meeting Alice's eyes. He's cool, I guess, she muttered. Rachel blinked at her, her expression caught somewhere between shock and worry. Cecilia, she said, leaning forward. What's wrong with you? Nothing, Cecilia snapped, pulling back as if Rachel's concern were physically painful. But Rachel didn't let her retreat, grabbing her wrist firmly. You, Cecilia hissed, her crimson mana flaring instinctively. But before it could take shape, Rachel's golden mana flickered in response, purifying the air between them. The clash was brief, barely a spark, but it was enough to make Cecilia scowl. "Your mana doesn't even have any fight in it," Rachel said softly, her sapphire eyes narrowing. Then her gaze shifted to Cecilia's face, and she gasped. "Shut up," Cecilia whispered, her voice trembling. Rachel didn't move, her expression unreadable. "So I was right." "So what?" Cecilia snapped, her voice cracking slightly. "I thoroughly ruined everything anyway." Finally, Cecilia looked at Alice, her face pale, her usual smirk nowhere to be seen. "Ms. Nightingale," she said quietly, "I think I should leave." "Fine, go," Rachel said, crossing her arms with a triumphant smile. "Leave and give up on him." Cecilia froze mid-step, her shoulders stiffening. Slowly, she turned back. "What did you just say? Isn't this admitting defeat?" Rachel asked, her voice calm but sharp. "He's the first boy you like, and you're giving up. What's the point?" Cecilia said bitterly. "I still won't." "There is always a point," Alice interjected gently. Her voice was calm but carried a weight that silenced both girls. "Dear, have you ever tried to harm Arthur?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Cecilia's crimson eyes flickered, her thoughts racing. Had she? No. She'd fought him, yes, during the island survival, but it was a game, a sparring match. She had never truly tried to hurt him. Even in her cruelest moments, when she toyed with people like they were nothing more than chess pieces, Arthur had been different. "I don't know anything," Cecilia whispered, her voice hollow. But the truth was clawing its way to the surface. Why had she wanted to break Arthur? To make him kneel before her? It wasn't about power. It wasn't even about control. It was about love, the only kind of love she had ever known. The kind that was sharp and cruel, that left others on their knees while she stood triumphant. That was how it was supposed to be. That was the only love she thought she deserved. And yet, "But I can't harm him," Cecilia said, her voice cracking. "So I can't even love him like I know how to." Her words hung in the air, raw and vulnerable in a way that felt completely foreign coming from her. Rachel's expression softened, her golden mana flickering faintly. "Then maybe it's time to learn a different way," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Cecilia's crimson mana surged briefly, a flicker of her old self, before it died down completely. "I don't know how," she admitted, her voice breaking. Alice leaned forward, her voice kind but firm. "Then don't give up, dear. Not on yourself. And not on him." For once, Cecilia didn't have a sharp retort. She just stood there, her crimson eyes glistening with something she didn't quite understand. "The wonderful thing about love," Alice began, her voice warm and soft, "is that it's never the same for everyone. Love is as unique as the people who feel it. It bends and twists in different ways, shaped by who we are. But there's one thing all real love has in common. It's always a win/win. True love builds, strengthens, and nurtures. It doesn't destroy. Harming someone as a way of expressing love." She paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. "That isn't love. That's obsession. A poor, twisted imitation, worse even than the most possessive love. But you, Cecilia? You're not obsessed." Cecilia flinched as if struck, but Alice's smile remained gentle. "If you were, you'd have hurt him. You would have tried to destroy him, even if it meant destroying yourself. But you didn't. You answered honestly. Even when you wanted to break him, you never crossed the line. Did you?" Cecilia's crimson eyes darted to the floor, her voice almost a whisper as she shook her head.
No.
"I didn't." Alice's smile widened, a motherly warmth radiating from her as she nodded. "Then I'm fine with you trying." "Trying?" Rachel interjected, blinking in surprise. Her sapphire eyes flickered between Alice and Cecilia, her golden mana stirring faintly with her confusion. "Yes, trying," Alice said, turning to Rachel with a mischievous wink. "Typically, it's the men who have to win our hearts, isn't it? But both of you seem to have found yourselves in the reverse situation." Rachel's cheeks flushed, and Cecilia's head snapped up, crimson eyes narrowing with suspicion. "What are you getting at, Ms. Nightingale?" Alice leaned back with a knowing smile, folding her hands neatly in her lap. "Arthur is a wonderful boy. Kind, clever,